Our protagonist, who was incredibly excited to discover he had grasped a bit of earth magic. He thought he could use the bricks he created, and because of that, the inn was imbued with his mana. This meant he could use the memory magic stored within it, making him even more thrilled with new ideas. Suddenly, the scene changed, and the protagonist was stunned, unable to move or remember anything. We see that he's turned into a crying newborn baby. He wondered if he'd been in some kind of accident. A woman appeared and asked if he was hungry. Seeing her, he wondered if the beautiful woman was his nurse, assuming he was in a hospital. Then she used magic to light up the room, and the protagonist suddenly realized that he had been reborn into another world, where magic actually existed. This was not Japan or the world he once knew. Finally, the woman breastfed the baby, saying it was time to eat, and he blushed when he saw her breasts. Unable to control his body, he began to nurse. He was overjoyed to realize that magic was real here, and this beautiful young woman was his mother. He excitedly thought that being reborn into a new world was amazing, because he got to start a new life as a baby. However, he didn't have a name yet. He heard people calling him Marie's child, and his name seemed to be Ashila. He knew that when he turned 6, there would be a naming ceremony, but for some reason, he had a bad feeling about it. Even so, what excited him more than anything was the magic. He noticed there was nothing to light up the room, which meant that in this world, magic could be a part of everyday life. He daydreamed about his own magical powers, trying to light up the room but crying out in frustration when he failed. His mother came to comfort him, and once he calmed down, he decided to try a different approach. First, he needed to observe how his family used magic, then learn from them bit by bit. His mother walked in and asked if he was awake, then used magic to light up the room and picked Ashila up. He noticed that they seemed to be drawing some kind of energy from their bodies to use magic, and he understood that energy was needed to do so. He also realized his vocal cords weren't developed enough to chant spells. After that, he focused on practicing his mana every day for 3 years. But even now, he still couldn't use his magical powers. While his family was always struggling, he was just a 3-year-old child. But poverty was already starting to affect his health. Starting today, he decided he had to find food for himself. He realized there were 2 types of mana, one inside the body and another that existed in the surroundings. The external mana could be drawn into the body through the mouth and merged with the mana already inside. He began absorbing mana from the air, and for the first time, he felt it gradually gathering around his lower abdomen, creating a strange sensation as the 2 streams of mana combined. Just below his stomach, he started trying to control and circulate the mana throughout his body. By doing this, he gradually refined the mana within him. However, he had to wait until he was 6 years old to participate in the naming ceremony and start using magic. Then, he would be able to use simple everyday spells like creating light, starting a fire, and producing water, magical skills that only his parents were able to use. Ever since he was a baby, he had tried time and time again to learn how to use magic and had finally made some progress. He began the process of absorbing mana from the air, drawing it down to his lower abdomen, refining it, then guiding it up to his chest and spreading it to his limbs. As the mana spread throughout his body, he carefully guided it back slowly without interruption. When in the open air, the mana looked like a type of gas. But once it flowed into his body, it felt more like a viscous liquid, giving him a deep sense of the potential power within. As his magic power surged, he focused on gathering it into his palm and releasing it into the ground. He tried to maintain his concentration, not wanting to lose his train of thought, especially since he had stopped at this point last time. He pictured the importance of practice, believing that the vitality of a field depends on the quality of its soil. The soil was soft, loose, and had a faint natural scent, holding precious nutrients. In his previous life, he remembered his grandmother in the countryside often using synthetic fertilizer on the soil, weeding and tending to the earth to improve its drainage and exposure to sunlight. Thinking about this, he completed his spell and was surprised to find he had succeeded. He noticed the plot of land was about 10 square meters, the terrain uneven because his family were farmers. but the soil in the field was hard and full of weeds. Ashila was surprised that the spell was simple, yet he had succeeded on his very first attempt at using magic in this new life. However, right after, he started to feel hungrier and wondered if using magic made him even hungrier. Without hesitating, he decided to start farming right away, planting 20 edible seeds. After 20 days, he was so moved he cried, telling himself he no longer cared about a child's pride and began to accept his life in this world. Watering became a challenge, difficult for a 3-year-old. But after the first 5 successful days of using magic, he felt relieved as he improved the soil and used magic every day, turning a portion of the land into a field of loose, fertile soil. Gradually, flowers began to bloom, a sign of a good harvest. But the strange thing was, the flowers bloomed after only 5 days, when it should normally take 20. When he tried pulling one up, he was stunned to see that the number of edible tubers was much larger than usual. Normally, there should only have been a few, but there were more than 10 large ones. He tried eating one, but found the taste wasn't very good. And so, his quest to revive the farm began. He continued to improve the soil and began to pay attention to seed selection. He noticed that the vegetables in the field grew incredibly fast, taking only 5 days to be ready for harvest. Even so, he kept eating them to avoid going hungry. Even though he knew the food in his past life was much tastier and more appealing, he was excited that his magic had broken the normal rules of nature. He didn't understand the theory behind it all yet, but watching the vegetables in his garden grow so quickly gave him the idea to take advantage of it. Even though the vegetables currently tasted bad, he hoped he could improve their flavor in the future. But he wondered, how could he improve the vegetables' taste? As he went to bed, he remembered a story from class about green peas, where someone tested thousands of peas to discover the principles of heredity. He thought that he didn't have enough varieties of 20s to start crossbreeding, and slowly drifted off to sleep with those thoughts. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that not only were the roots different, but the stems and flowers were slightly different too. Some 20s tubers were black, others were reddish-purple, and some grew in larger clusters. The flowers also had a variety of colors, from white to yellow. He cataloged each characteristic and divided the soil into 6 sections based on their distinct traits. At first, he just wanted to secure a food source, but these makeshift experiments gradually became his daily routine. He realized that these vegetables also contained a special kind of magic. The magic he had created combined both internal and external magical power, creating a unique blend that helped him hone his skills and unlock the potential within these vegetables. Each time he cast the spell, the merged magic was consumed. And when he tried to merge it again, he realized he had no internal magic left, making it impossible to continue merging or casting spells. From then on, he wondered how to restore his internal magic faster. He had realized that magic could recover naturally over time, but the pace wasn't fast enough for his needs. After experimenting by eating the vegetables regularly, he concluded that eating them helped his magic recover faster. However, mana didn't recover immediately after eating. It took some time. That's why he hadn't noticed this until now. He asked himself an important question. What kind of food restored the most mana? After trying various types of 20s, he found that the amount of mana recovered differed depending on the variety. Although he couldn't change the vegetable's flavor yet, he decided to put that aside for the time being, and decided to classify the vegetables that could restore the most mana. He felt a thrill of excitement discovering something new every day. He knew for sure that he needed to compare and prioritize the foods that restored the most mana, but this small body of his also had its limits. He wished there was a faster way and decided to expand his cultivation area. At first, he could only concentrate with his eyes closed, but now he was getting used to using magic without needing to do that. When he cast the spell, he was stunned, wondering to himself how his power could have improved so much. When he heard a strange sound but couldn't pinpoint its origin, he had an idea: to focus refined mana into his eyes to observe. Immediately, he saw a faint blue aura rising from the fields. He pulled up a 20s plant and was thrilled to see that this blue aura was actually radiating from its roots, escaping into the air. He realized that the plants restoring the most mana had the deepest blue hue, and he speculated that this blue color was the mana itself. He continued to observe and eat the vegetables, all while focusing mana into his eyes. After a while, he noticed that the densest clusters of vegetables were also the richest in mana. He began to take notes on his genetic findings, and at 5 years old, he continued to make new discoveries. He realized that the vegetables that restored the most mana didn't produce an immediate effect, and that when he focused mana into his eyes, the information he perceived about objects changed. The blue color of the mana sparked his imagination, making him think that if he focused mana on a different part of his busy life, something else might happen. This train of thought wasn't wrong, but he decided to rest and sleep until the next day. The next day, instead of letting his mana radiate out of his body and seep into the soil, he kept the mana contained within him. Then, he tried using body-strengthening magic. Watering his crops became much easier, and he was also able to expand the fields even more. When he concentrated mana into specific parts of his body, he noticed a significant increase in the strength of his arms and legs. He wondered if his muscles could be enhanced. What about his internal organs? If he could strengthen his digestive system, could he absorb mana from the vegetables faster? He gave it a try and felt his absorption and digestion speed increase significantly. All this time, he had been putting a great deal of effort into tailoring his magic usage for each specific situation. But then, one day, his father took out his sword and said that he had to leave. His mother, full of worry, told him to be careful and promised that she would wait for him to return safely. She told Ashila that from now on, he was in charge of things at home. His father, who had always been the pillar of the family, had to leave because he was summoned to join the war effort, as a large-scale conflict erupted, forcing most of the men in the village to depart. Ashala always felt that the technology in this world was very primitive, and it seemed that war was one of the reasons why. In times of peace, the villagers would work together, gradually clearing land to create surplus farmland. But now, all of that had been disrupted by the war. The village's agriculture depended on the amount of land they owned. If it weren't for the war, there would be more new fields, paving the way for technological development and greater prosperity. This made him realize that his magic, which allowed him to create his own fields, played a crucial role in the current situation. Taxes were calculated based on the area of land used, so his field had a distinct advantage. But what worried him most was the poor quality of the equipment for those who had to go off to fight. They mostly had nothing but farming tools, and he wondered if those would be of any help to them in battle. He feared this could lead to casualties and create turmoil in the village, putting them at risk of losing their homes. With memories from his past life, he didn't want to have to kill anyone, and thought that, at the very least, they would need good weapons and armor, but most importantly, they needed money. However, when he saw his mother stir-frying tubers from the 20s field, he realized a much bigger problem. Life in the village barely generated any income. He thought about it and realized the only way was to rely on merchants. His mother suggested trying to make sandals from the dried 20s stalks, since they could create various products from them and earn a little money for shopping. Although he didn't say it out loud, this seemed quite inefficient in his eyes, because merchants travel between towns and villages, and they would demand products of higher quality or value to make the transport worthwhile. Ashila realized that selling sandals made from 20s stalks could bring in some income, but he needed to learn how to negotiate prices to get a better profit. His mother taught him how to make the sandals, and he began producing them every day. When a merchant arrived, he praised the quality of the sandals and paid a small amount of money. Ashila was overjoyed when he saw the shiny coins, but was then disappointed to realize it was only 6 old copper coins. He realized the price for the sandals was lower than he'd expected, and at this rate, it would take a very long time to earn enough money for weapons. He called the merchant back and asked a few questions, which is how he learned about the market price. After a few days of research, he decided to try and apply the information he had gathered to increase his income. Later, the merchant revealed something about magic mushrooms, a type of mushroom that could restore magical power, but was very rare because it was difficult to cultivate and the supply was scarce. The merchant even gave Ashila some to try. They were very rare, but he found the taste rather bland. Ashila thought about it and came up with the idea that the mushrooms might grow from molds on trees, which would provide the main nutrients for their growth. If he created a suitable environment for the mold to grow, perhaps he could cultivate these mushrooms artificially. This opened up a new business opportunity, one that could bring in a much higher income than selling sandals. Ashila already had a few dry logs, which saved him a lot of effort since the right balance of moisture and dryness was essential. He planted the mold on the wood and waited for it to grow. However, if cultivating magic mushrooms were that easy, surely someone else would have done it long ago. He thought to himself that if these mushrooms had magical properties, they must contain a large amount of magical power. And if they drew nutrients from the trees, then they were probably absorbing magical power from them as well. With this in mind, Ashila tried infusing his own magical power into the logs instead of letting the mushrooms draw it from the trees themselves. He began experimenting by infusing different amounts of magical power into each log. After some time, mushrooms began to sprout, but only 3 of them. Still, it proved the method was effective. To make a profit, he needed to grow them on a larger scale, but his house wasn't big enough to hold everything. Therefore, he needed a separate building to store the mushrooms. When he used magic to create the field, he could raise the earth to form ridges. In the same way, he figured he could probably manipulate the shape of the earth to construct a building. This would be a major challenge in magical architecture for Ashila. Ashila reconsidered and realized he wasn't just trying things at random. He thought about the rules of magic. Creating something from nothing was extremely difficult. Earth magic in games, for example, was when refined magical power within the body was gathered into the palm and used to create pebbles or rocks. The stone's destructive power depended on the speed at which it was launched, and by visualizing the entire process, he could make it happen. Something that was really interesting but incredibly draining in terms of energy. Ashila noticed that earth magic was easier to use when there was something already there for him to manipulate. He found he had a knack for earth magic, but was frustrated by the thought that he could only use his magic when there was earth around. He came up with the idea that if he could transform soil into metal, it would solve the problem. His next challenge was to create a warehouse from the earth itself. And he began to put it into practice by kneeling down and touching the ground. But just as he started to cast the spell, he felt something was wrong and passed out. When he woke up, Ashila saw his worried mother by his side. His head was throbbing, and his mother told him he had been bedridden for 2 days. He realized the reason for his sudden collapse was that all the magical energy in his body had been completely drained. His magical energy had been circulating throughout his body to power his physical enhancement magic, and this had caused the depletion. Although it was a failure, Ashila learned an important lesson. A failed spell doesn't have too many severe consequences. Normally, his magical energy shouldn't have been drained so completely, but the reason for the rapid consumption lay in the relationship between surface area and volume. Simply put, he had consumed 10 times the necessary amount of magical energy due to the dimensional discrepancy. Ashila decided to give up on constructing the building for now, and instead focus on creating the building materials. Architectural magic was still a distant dream, so he decided to take it one step at a time. After successfully making a single brick, he created a simple structure, but it looked so dull that it made him feel like a mere apprentice. Afterward, he ran to his ancestors' mosaic land, a plot that had been farmed for generations, and was now unsuitable for cultivation. He had always been secretly proud of his village's unique charm, and he used his magic to clear the plot, turning all the stones and tree stumps into fertilizer for the soil. Ashila laid out his plan. He would need to use soil improvement magic, body enhancement magic, and brick creation magic. However, The soil improvement spell took a considerable amount of time. He sat down, touching the earth to enhance its quality. Every time he used magic, he had to recite an incantation, as it required a great deal of time and effort to cast a spell successfully. This time, however, he was surprised when the magic activated the very moment he recited the chant, even though he previously had to clearly visualize what he wanted to accomplish. He was thrilled to realize he had developed his own form of magic, which he called chant creation, and this method was far more effective than he had imagined. Ashila contemplated using magic with fewer chants, which made him all the more eager to explore his power. He felt exhausted, but was also incredibly grateful that the magic could activate right after he recited the incantation. He tried again, further improving the quality of the soil, noticing that the spell had an effective range of about 10 square meters when he used the chant, ensuring the effect was stable without requiring too much adjustment. He thought that if he could adjust the amount of magical energy consumed based on the spell's range, things would become much easier. But he still wondered how that was even possible. He began to experiment by muttering, "Create brick," and as he touched the ground, it instantly turned into a brick. After that, he continued to practice, muttering the word brick even in his sleep. And after several months, he could produce bricks of the exact same size and mass, almost like a conditioned reflex. Just like how hearing a bell might make someone salivate, he had developed a similar reflex for when he cast his spells. Finally, he developed a new technique he called chanting, and decided to apply it to his other spells, like body enhancement and land preparation. However, the villagers grew a little worried, seeing how obsessed Ashila had become with his experiments and the sheer number of bricks he was stockpiling. When his mother joked that if those bricks were dishes, they'd at least be useful, Ashila began to wonder if he could create bowls from the earth, just as he had done with the bricks. This sparked a new idea for him. Maybe this raw material could also be turned into useful household items. Ashila transformed the earth into cups and plates, but his mother wasn't very impressed with the ordinary clay bowls. Taking it as a challenge, Ashila decided to focus on quality over quantity and created a set of white porcelain cups and saucers. His mother was surprised and praised them, as she had never seen such pure-looking dinnerware. This made Ashila realize that perhaps he didn't need to strictly adhere to standard materials when using magic. He continued to experiment and created a cup with a flower painted on it. But the clumsy drawing made him realize he had no talent for painting. Undeterred, Ashila decided to create other items besides white porcelain. He remembered that sea sand could be used to make glass, so he created a transparent glass cup, an item never before seen in the village, and perhaps not even in the surrounding regions. His next challenge was to increase the production of magic mushrooms. Just then, the merchant appeared and called out his name, saying he had something to discuss. Ashila was delighted, as this was the perfect opportunity to sell some of the items he had made. However, the merchant instead asked to buy some spare bricks from his house, which surprised Ashila. He asked again to confirm and excitedly said he had also created some new items, but the merchant seemed confused, not understanding what he was talking about. The merchant told Ashila to call his parents to negotiate the sale of the bricks. Ashila replied that he had plenty of bricks, but the merchant was only interested in buying them now and promised to look at the pottery next time. Ashila looked at him with dissatisfaction, insisting that he wouldn't regret passing up the chance to buy his pottery. And finally, the merchant agreed to take a look. Upon seeing Ashila's pottery, the merchant was astonished and asked him how he had created such items. He then agreed to buy both the bricks and the pottery, but Ashila was disappointed when he only received 5 copper coins. He grabbed the merchant and angrily asked if he took him for a naive child who knew nothing. The startled merchant explained that he had paid more than the usual rate, and that the villagers couldn't afford to spend much money on such luxury items. The merchant explained that rich people don't trade with peddlers like him, but only deal with established merchants. Ashila thought about marketing his products to the nobility, those who were willing to pay, but there was no way to reach them in a world without the internet or newspapers. He felt frustrated. and thought that talking to this merchant was a waste of time. Seeing Ashila's sad expression, the merchant consoled him by saying the market for bricks was very stable and promised to buy all the bricks he had next time. When the merchant came the next time, Ashila had prepared 10 times the amount of bricks. The merchant was surprised and said he had brought someone strong to help transport them. Ashila was surprised to see the animal the merchant brought, and seeing his confused look, the merchant asked if he had ever heard of a dragon horse, explaining that it was a very strong work beast. We learn that work beasts are creatures raised from eggs to assist their owners. Work beasts born this way are very loyal to their master or parent. The work beast's egg develops by absorbing magical energy from its owner, and its form depends on the type of magic provided, meaning its appearance will reflect the characteristics of the one who hatched it. For this reason, those who can create unique or useful working beasts are highly valued. As the merchant loaded the bricks onto the back of a dragon horse, he explained that incredibly powerful dragons existed in this world, and that this working beast, which resembled a dragon, was famous for its strength, endurance, and courage. Additionally, there were super durable working horses and flying working birds that were also very popular. Ashila curiously asked if working beasts were expensive, and the merchant confirmed that dragon horses, or any beasts that could be used for transportation, were valuable assets. Pondering this, Ashila realized that even though bricks were in high demand now, there was no guarantee they would always be popular. He decided he needed to diversify the goods he could sell, but having never been born from an egg himself, he had no idea how the hatching process worked. Ashila called the merchant over and said he wanted to try raising a working beast egg, suggesting the merchant bring an egg with him next time and he would buy it. The price of the egg the merchant brought nearly wiped out all the money he had saved up. Ashila's mother was furious, unable to believe he had spent all their money just to buy a working beast egg, asking him what on earth he was thinking. Ashila explained that after the egg hatched, they would make a lot more money, but his mother disagreed. She said if it were that easy, everyone would be rich. She argued that buying a working beast egg was no different from gambling away their entire fortune, since many people had been tricked into buying random animal eggs that rarely, if ever, actually hatched. Ashila retorted that he had earned the money himself and wanted to use it for his future. But his mother scoffed, reminding him that not all of that money was his. Hadn't he been selling the sandals that everyone in the family made together? Finally, she laid down the law. From now on, Ashila was forbidden from buying anything without her permission. He bowed his head and apologized, realizing he had made a huge mistake. He shuddered to see how his mother, who was still so young and beautiful, could become so terrifying when she was angry. He blamed himself, as he was the one responsible for making the bricks and selling them to the merchant. And now everything depended on whether this egg would hatch a useful working beast. Ashila made a net bag from the stems of a 20s plant to hold the egg and carry it safely with him. He wondered if he could get several people to channel their magical power into the egg to help it hatch, but he realized that everyone's magic was different, which made it difficult to incubate the same type of working beast together. As he held the egg in his hands, he could feel it drawing magical power from him. Ashila poured magical power into his eyes to see more clearly, and saw the egg emitting a blue mist. He noticed that the egg contained very little magical power, yet it emitted this blue aura. When he chanted the spell, Channel Magical Power, he saw the blue color deepen and the magical power he channeled into it get absorbed. However, he wasn't sure how much magical power he needed to use for this. Every day, Ashila channeled magical power into the egg while being supervised by others. He began to think that perhaps he needed a private hideout, and just as his mother had said, he was still a child and shouldn't be spending money on his own. Although he hated being treated like a kid, he started saving money so he could buy a good weapon, as it would be important for making a name for himself during wartime. Ashila thought about his future. As a younger son, he knew he would either have to live under the control of his eldest brother or strike out on his own. Therefore, in addition to preparing a weapon, he decided to get ready for an independent life. His village was surrounded by a fence, and beyond it lay a dense forest. In the past, when the lands were safer, trees were cut down and the land was cultivated to expand the village. However, with the constant warfare, the amount of farmland was gradually shrinking. Leaving his house, Ashila decided to find a place to build his hideout. Using body reinforcement magic, he was able to avoid fatigue despite the strenuous work. He started by touching the ground and removing tree stumps, causing the stumps to lose their strength to support the tree trunks. He continued to use magic to clear the area, flattening a 10 by 4 meter area with compacted earth, creating a large area to lay the foundation for a storage shed. He figured that if he built the entire house at once, the amount of mana required would depend not only on the area, but also on the internal volume. This would make the mana consumption wasteful and dangerous. In the end, he decided to build each wall individually. He began the process, using mortar to set the bricks as he visualized a complete wall. As he cast the spell, the bricks began to automatically assemble and take shape, and he completed his hideout in the forest in no time. When he stepped out and looked at the egg, he noticed it had grown much larger, and its magical aura had turned a deep blue, signaling that it might be about to hatch. Returning home, his mother came to him and said that it was almost time. Ashila was delighted to realize that he would be turning 6 years old this year, entering an important stage of his life. When a person turns 6, they participate in a baptism ceremony at the village church. Today was Ashila's special day. When they arrived at the church, Ashila wondered why he couldn't remember the baptism from his past life. Perhaps because he wasn't very happy back then. But now, the naming ceremony would take place during this baptism, and he eagerly awaited this moment. Upon seeing Ashila, the priest raised his hand, signaling the start of the ritual. Ashila was thrilled, because after today, he would officially be able to use his family's magic. For generations, humanity had always had to hide from the threat of monsters. But the family magic gave them a basic means of self-defense, helping to expand the lands they could inhabit. Thanks to magic, humanity, who couldn't defeat monsters on their own, was able to build large and prosperous settlements. The priest began the ceremony, and now, Ashila's naming ceremony officially commenced, marking a new turning point in his life. During the baptism, all citizens would receive the family magic. The priest announced that they would perform the ritual for each person one by one, and asked everyone to wait patiently for their turn. As a key driver of population growth, the church had attracted many followers, and the feudal lord had re-established a registration system, as well as a system to ensure everyone could benefit from the magic. Ashila sat before the priest, who explained that through this naming ceremony, he would receive the divine protection of the gods and the ability to use magic. He also stressed that this magic should only be used to improve people's lives, and asked him to swear not to abuse it. Ashila promised to keep that vow. As the priest raised his hand, Ashila focused mana into his eyes to observe, seeing that the magical energy was concentrating in the priest's palm. The priest created a magic circle, and Ashila was stunned to see his memory preservation spell activate automatically, helping him efficiently store the new memory. The magic circle sent new information directly into his mind, granting him the ability to use the family magic. Ashila tried casting a light spell and realized that the family magic consisted of basic skills. He understood that the effectiveness of the magic didn't change whether the user was a child just learning it or an adult who had used it for years. Even as a person's mana increased, the power of the family magic, like the ability to create fire, showed no significant improvement. This disappointed Ashila, as he had hoped that after receiving the family magic, he would be able to use types of magic other than his earth magic. However, he decided to set aside improving the family magic for the time being. Recalling another of his accomplishments, he thought of his father's magic circle. Ashila wondered if he would ever be able to understand more about this world's magic. Despite his best efforts, he was still confused and sleep-deprived, because he couldn't decipher the ancient characters, let alone the modern ones of this era. Suddenly, he heard a cracking sound from the egg. Looking over, he realized it was about to hatch. Approaching nervously, Ashila wondered what kind of work creature would be born from this egg. As the creature inside the egg began to struggle, Ashila wondered if he should give it a little help. Finally, as the eggshell cracked wide open, a beautiful little horse emerged. Immediately, the foal tried to get up, and Ashila was amazed that it could already stand. He encouraged the little horse, and it finally stood steady, prompting Ashila to clap joyfully and wave his hands in front of it, thanking it for coming into his life. Ashila took a closer look at the foal and noticed it resembled a small reindeer. He said that when it grew up, it would be big enough to help him carry things. The little horse began to eat its own eggshell, and Ashila wondered if it was okay for it to eat the eggshell. He wondered what this creature would eat, since the diet of a working beast from birth depends on the type of magical power it's nurtured with, which also affects its behavior. Ashila wondered what dragon horses ate, since they were very efficient but didn't eat meat, and providing meat every day would be too hard for a poor farming family. Thinking, he remembered he had some extra radishes growing in his hideout, so he went and brought some over. The little horse tried the radishes and ate them all up, making Ashila sigh in relief that he wouldn't have to worry about going broke just to feed it. The horse stared intently at him, as if committing its new master to memory. The small horse climbed onto Ashila's lap, curled up, and began to snore softly, which made him blush at how adorable it was. 10 days passed, and the horse had grown, now carrying an air of dignity. Although he had grown attached, Ashila decided to sell it to keep his feelings from getting in the way of his original goal. Still, he wanted to give the horse a special name. Sensing that family magic was imprinted on the mind through a magic circle, he figured this horse must also have some magical power, and could at least create its own clean drinking water. Suddenly, the name Valkyrie popped into his mind, and Ashila was surprised by how well it suited the horse's shimmering silver-white coat, which made it look like a divine creature. When he asked if it liked the name Valkyrie, the horse nodded, delighting Ashila, who thought it might actually understand human speech. He began the naming ceremony slowly and carefully, feeling like a vessel overflowing with dense magical power. Keeping the magic stable wasn't easy, but Ashila continued, step by step, completing the naming ritual with all the solemnity and emotion he felt for Valkyrie. Ashila focused all his effort on recreating every detail of the magic circle he had memorized, using threads of mana to control magic outside his body, a feat that demanded immense concentration. Finally, he successfully created the magic circle and officially named the horse Valkyrie. Once it was complete, Ashila sank to his knees, realizing the ritual had taken more out of him than he'd anticipated. To test her magic, he and Valkyrie went outside to avoid causing any danger indoors. Valkyrie tried a light spell, astonishing Ashila. He encouraged her to try other kinds of magic, and Valkyrie immediately demonstrated her family magic abilities. However, what truly stunned Ashila was that she could make bricks float and even use the memory preservation spell, something he thought only those named during a church baptism could do. Curious, Ashila asked Valkyrie to look at a clay pot and try to create one just like it, but she couldn't. He realized Valkyrie could only use the same spells he had become able to use after his own naming ceremony. For example, he could resize and flatten land, with the mana cost corresponding to the area, and Valkyrie could do the same. Ashila concluded that Valkyrie's magical abilities were directly linked to what he had already learned and mastered. Ashila noticed that Valkyrie's ability to flatten land was limited to an area of 10 square meters. He began to wonder if naming rituals were more of a system than a form of divine protection, and realized they were limited by the spells mastered by the namer, with no room for customization. This explained why family magic could never be improved. Ashila praised Valkyrie and wondered if it was even safe to sell her, since she could use not only family magic, but his own original spells as well. When he asked the merchant if working beasts could use magic, the merchant thought for a moment before replying that he had never heard of such a thing. Ashila figured that if a merchant who had traveled and traded far and wide had never heard of it, it must be incredibly rare. The merchant, excited to hear about Valkyrie's special ability, asked Ashila for a demonstration of her magic. However, Ashila was careful to warn Valkyrie not to use his personal magic in front of others, keeping her unique abilities a secret. Ashila agreed to let the merchant see Valkyrie, and when she appeared, the man was amazed by her pure white coat and her load-carrying capacity. When the merchant offered to buy Valkyrie, Ashila surprised him by refusing, explaining that even though he had originally bought the egg to make money, he had grown attached to Valkyrie and wanted to keep her with him. The merchant, also impressed with his magical abilities, realized that he would be a powerful assistant, even stronger than a child. Seeing this, the merchant made an offer. He had 5 other work beast eggs and was willing to give them to Ashila. He suggested that after Ashila raised the work beast from these eggs, he could sell them. And the merchant assured him it wouldn't be hard to find buyers if they were raised by Ashila. Even though he might take a loss at first, the potential profit would be enough to make up for it. Ashila, hearing this, began to set the terms for the deal. He emphasized that he would set some minimum requirements to protect his own interests. Seeing him lay down conditions, the merchant had a bad feeling, worrying that Ashila would negotiate a more favorable deal for himself. Ashila realized that raising work beasts from eggs might be the best way a farmer could hope to make money. He was determined to grow this business and work hard. One day, he saw Valkyrie take one of the eggs, which made him panic and scream, telling her she wasn't allowed to eat it. But Valkyrie confirmed that she was just keeping it safe. Ashila asked if Valkyrie intended to raise these eggs, and she touched her nose to an egg, using her magic to transfer mana. He was surprised to see that she could transfer mana into the eggs. Valkyrie explained that mana from multiple people could be used to incubate eggs, but it required a significant amount of mana. Ashila decided to entrust the task of incubating the eggs to Valkyrie and asked her to take good care of them. Remembering his past life, Ashila recalled how he once brought home a stray dog. His mother had been furious and asked if he was capable of taking care of it. Despite being scolded by his parents, he was eventually allowed to keep the dog, promising that he would truly look after it. Back then, he simply thought it meant feeding the dog and taking it for walks, forgetting that other costs like food, vaccinations, and medical care were all paid for by his parents. Now, looking back, he realized his parents had been right. Taking care of a living creature really requires a lot of responsibility and effort. Smiling, Ashila found that raising the eggs was just as challenging as raising a puppy. However, he was determined to care for them until they hatched safely. Each work beast Ashila raised from an egg was a little bigger and looked exactly the same. By ensuring the safety of each one, he had completed the first stage. Now, to continue growing his work beast breeding business, he had to expand the number of fields by clearing the forest around his hideout. So, Ashila decided to use his old method, softening the soil around the tree roots, pulling the trees out from the roots, and then using soil improvement magic. Just as he finished preparing, he was surprised to realize that it wasn't him, but the little horses that were also using magic. Amazed, Ashila wondered how they could use magic without being named yet. He thought that perhaps work beasts followed different rules than humans, not needing a name to be able to use magic. He wondered if Valkyrie could ask them not to use magic and if they would listen. Determined to expand the area of his fields, Ashila continued his work. After finishing, he looked at the vast area before him, which looked like a section of the forest had been completely cleared. The area was so large that he couldn't take in its width in a single glance. Ashila, with his knowledge of environmental protection from his previous life, wondered if he was causing any harm. But when he looked closer, he noticed that this area had once been fields that the forest had reclaimed after the population decreased and the land was abandoned. The forest was so vast that the village had permitted the expansion of the fields. If he wanted to raise large work beasts like Valkyrie, a grazing area would be just as necessary as fields. However, the larger the area, the more difficult it was to get around. And to ensure safety and save energy when fighting, Ashila realized he needed to find a faster way to travel. When Valkyrie came to his side, he had the idea of riding her. And even though Valkyrie wasn't a horse, he thought a saddle and stirrups might still work. But after asking around, he learned that no one in the village could make a saddle or stirrups for a work beast. They suggested that using a cart would probably be fine, since work beasts were usually used to pull carts rather than being ridden. Even so, Ashila still wanted to learn to ride Valkyrie, thinking that if he ever had to go to a battlefield one day, being able to ride the Valkyrie would be a huge advantage. In this world, it was common knowledge that cavalry had a significant advantage over infantry. Determined to test it out, he climbed onto the Valkyrie's back. Ashila realized that controlling a living creature at will was a necessary skill, but riding the Valkyrie was easier than he had imagined. With the Valkyrie's exceptional intelligence, thanks to being nurtured with his mana, she moved carefully so as not to put any strain on him. Ashila thanked her, pleased that he could ride without a saddle, but suddenly, he started feeling dizzy and nauseous, like motion sickness. He wondered how riding a work beast could make him feel so terrible, and realized he would need more practice to get used to riding the Valkyrie. Ashila's entire body ached after each session of riding the Valkyrie. He realized that even though the Valkyrie tried to move gently, the vibrations were unavoidable. To stabilize himself, he decided to grip the Valkyrie's body tightly with both hands and tense his entire body to maintain his balance. By doing so, he significantly reduced the feeling of shaking. However, his body was still sore that night, and he wondered if having a saddle and protective gear would make it better. Even so, Ashila was determined to continue his riding practice every day. As he was preparing for bed, his older brother remarked that he often muttered something before falling asleep. Ashila frantically denied it, but in truth, he was teaching himself magic and testing new spells. During this process, he noticed that when he focused mana into his eyes, he could see a faint blue aura emanating from everyone, like mana leaking from their bodies. He wondered what would happen if he prevented his mana from escaping. Ashila discovered that keeping the mana within his body greatly improved his recovery abilities. As he experimented, he realized that the physical enhancement spell not only made him stronger, but also had a lingering effect after being cast. He pondered how to optimize his magic to maintain his body's recovery, even during sleep. The next morning, his body had completely recovered, allowing him to continue his riding practice without any hesitation. Just then, the merchant came to visit, bringing a new egg and offering to let Ashila incubate it. Ashila was surprised to see that the work beast from the eggs the merchant had brought before had grown much faster than expected. He thought it would take 1 or 2 hatching cycles, but the work beast had grown exceptionally well. When he asked about this, the merchant explained that although there were many eggs, they usually didn't hatch all at once, and each egg typically took over a month to hatch. Ashila wondered if injecting them with mana was the reason they grew so quickly. When the merchant said he could sell them right away, Ashila wondered what he should do and what the buyer's intentions would be. The merchant confessed that he initially had no intention of selling them. Ashila asked if the merchant intended to use them for his own work, and the merchant laughed, saying that was indeed the plan. He said that first, he would be giving some of these work beasts away for free. Ashila was disappointed to hear that, but the merchant explained that in order to sell products to the nobility, the ones who governed this land, he needed to build relationships and credibility. The merchant explained that merchants like him, who traveled from village to village, often lacked the necessary connections to handle expensive items. To sell to the nobility, you need credit and strong relationships, because the shops that cater to nobles often have exclusive dealings, making it difficult for newcomers to break in. The merchant added that expensive products could only be sold to the nobility, but he had neither the connections nor the reputation to even meet them. Ashila asked if this was a case of the merchant once owning a rare luxury item, but failing to sell it because he lacked a go-between. The merchant admitted this sheepishly and said that this time, if he gifted a valuable work beast, things would be different. He explained that a rideable work beast, recognized as useful and valuable, could be a crucial strategic asset, especially in times of war. The merchant added that gifting this work beast, a highly sought-after item, would help him establish a solid relationship with the nobility. If the nobles were pleased, they might buy more in the future and even introduce him to other nobles. When Ashila asked for more clarification, the merchant explained that the nobles who ruled this land could not be ignored. In terms of social standing, it would give him a chance to advance in the work-beast business. Ashila realized that if the merchant sold a strategically valuable work-beast to a nobleman, it would open up many new opportunities for both the merchant and himself. Opportunities to access high-end markets and build stronger connections with the nobility. Ashila, along with the merchant and his father, left his village for the first time to go to where the nobles lived. They traveled a rough road for 3 days and arrived in Fontana, the place where the nobles resided. For Ashila, this was his first exciting journey, and he was amazed by the bustling activity of the place. When the merchant showed Ashila and his father a part of the town that was being expanded, he realized why bricks were in such high demand. The merchant explained that they were tearing down and rebuilding a section of the wall to expand the town. But even after reusing bricks, the supply still wasn't enough. Hearing this, Ashila asked if the merchant thought the demand for bricks would continue for long. The merchant nodded, saying that with the current pace of development, the demand for bricks would likely remain steady or even increase as the town expanded. He said they could still produce bricks locally in Fontana for now, so it would probably be a while before they needed to import them. Hearing that, Ashila understood that profiting from selling bricks wouldn't last forever. He decided that this meeting with the nobility was a crucial opportunity. A man named Raymond, the negotiator for the Fontana family, appeared and introduced himself. They bowed to him respectfully, and Ashila felt a thrill of excitement at the chance to see a nobleman's house. Raymond said that according to the information he'd received, these work beasts could be ridden. The merchant confirmed it, asserting they were of high quality and could be ridden even while wearing armor. He added that they would be honored to introduce the work beast to Lord Fontana. And Raymond stepped forward to ask about Ashila. The merchant explained that Ashila was the one who had raised the work beasts, and the man beside him was his father. Raymond remarked that Ashila's ability to raise work beasts seemed to have long-term potential, and the merchant confirmed it, introducing the Valkyrie to him. Ashila was stunned to hear the name Valkyrie mentioned, but the merchant skillfully asked Raymond for permission so they could demonstrate the Valkyrie's full capabilities to the Fontana family. Ashila was dismayed as the merchant and Raymond discussed producing and selling Valkyries, because to him, that was the name of his first work beast, not a name for the entire species. The real Valkyrie was back looking after the village, and he had no intention of selling her. Raymond agreed to grant them a license and encouraged them to continue working hard. He approached the work beasts and commented that they might not be useful in war because their horns would get in the way of using weapons. Then Raymond called someone over and ordered them to cut off the work beast's horns. Ashila was horrified and about to protest, but his father stopped him. He couldn't believe they were willing to hurt the work beasts the moment they received them. Ashila seethed with anger as he watched their horns get sawed off. At the inn, Ashila blamed himself for holding back instead of protecting the work beasts. His father reminded him that even though their horns were cut off, they didn't cry out at all, which reminded Ashila of guide dogs that were trained not to bark even when injured. He felt a pang of guilt for not realizing the work beast's loyalty and teared up as he thought about it. His father tried to comfort him and asked what was really bothering him. Ashila replied that what worried him more than the physical pain was the possibility that cutting the horns could shorten their lifespan. Ashila was worried that if the work beasts died early because their horns were removed, they might get the blame. Despite his anger over the horns being cut, he realized that in order to continue the work beast business, he needed to investigate this more thoroughly. His father remarked that he was being very calm, but Ashila replied that he was just trying to accept his lowly position as a peasant. His father smiled and reminded him that even as a peasant with no formal education, he was not an ignorant man. Even with his knowledge from a past life, there were things his father noticed that Ashila didn't. Ashila, despite being just a child, had expanded their land by clearing the forest in a short amount of time. which led the villagers to whisper that he might struggle to pay his taxes. The village chief even planned to seize his fields as a way to punish him for changing the land so quickly. He realized that on top of the worst beast business, just holding on to and protecting what he had built would be a major challenge going forward. Ashila's father had been working hard to convince the noble family governing the region that raising work beasts required a vast amount of land. They needed to expand their farming to provide enough resources for the breeding. However, the amount of wheat they produced wasn't enough to pay the taxes on such a large plot of land. Raising work animals and clearing forests were also things the nobles desired. Fortunately, they received a permit that allowed them to own land and pay taxes in cash instead of wheat. Ashila's father suggested that since they were in town, they should look around and buy some necessities. Ashila felt happy to have a father he could trust, and thought to himself how lucky he was. As they walked around town, Ashila noticed there weren't many wooden buildings, and wondered if wood wasn't popular here. His father explained that wooden buildings weren't common for safety and durability reasons. Many places preferred brick or stone for their fire resistance and longer lifespan. Ashila's father explained that wooden buildings were vulnerable to fire due to ignition magic. Even so, most buildings in town had few windows because they could use magic for lighting. Ashila realized this was related to his family's magic and the divine protection, though he still wondered if this power was truly connected to the gods. Seeing a window, Ashila had an idea. Glass might be in higher demand because it's more convenient and easier to use. He thought that if he tweaked his magic a little, he could mass-produce glass just like bricks, meeting the demand from construction projects. Ashila's father told the merchant that Ashila always surprised him and that thanks to the radishes he grew, the village had started to thrive. The merchant overheard this, and Ashila's father recounted the harsh past when crop failures made it easy for people to starve, and prolonged droughts devastated the land. In the context of war, famine led to conflicts over food. At that moment, the merchant took notice of Ashila's radishes, wondering why this vegetable, which grew wild everywhere, was getting so much attention. However, when he tried one of Ashila's radishes, the merchant found it to be crisp, firm, and quite pleasant tasting, a significant improvement over the bitter, hard-to-eat wild kind. He concluded that if radishes of this quality became widespread, they would surely help reduce starvation. This new type of radish came from a village near the northern forest. When the merchant visited that village, he was astonished because villages back then were usually dark, stuffy, and dull. However, when he arrived at Ashila's village, he noticed it was different. Impressed, the merchant asked a barrage of questions about what else the village had to offer. After buying a large quantity of radishes and sandals, he met with other farmers and helped them cultivate this new radish. A few years later, Ashila began to introduce new products to the merchant besides sandals, like the magic mushrooms that grew in the forest, which he had mentioned before. However, since going into the forest could be dangerous for a young boy, the merchant advised Ashila to wait until he was older. Despite that, Ashila was confident he could handle himself and promised to be careful. The merchant was worried, especially since many young people had faced danger and lost their lives in the forest before. But Ashila, once again, showed him a pottery set he had made himself, which astonished the merchant and made him question the boy's origins. The merchant had once speculated that Ashila might be a noble, or from a fallen noble family, but all those guesses were wrong. After Ashila was baptized, the merchant was surprised again when he saw that the work animal the boy had raised turned out to be a rare and valuable type of horse. Even though Ashila had started selling bricks and magic mushrooms, he was constantly looking for new products to sell. When the merchant asked why he was trying so hard to earn money, Ashila replied that he wanted weapons to join the war. The merchant thought that perhaps Ashila wished to restore his family's honor through battlefield achievements. But that was also a mistaken assumption. Regardless, he realized that Ashila was an important person with great influence and a promising future. In order to establish a solid relationship with Ashila, the merchant decided he needed to secure exclusive rights to trade the work animals the boy produced. He was determined to maintain this relationship at all costs, especially for when Ashila came of age and joined the nobility. He hoped that Ashila would trust him completely. On the way back to the village, Ashila asked the merchant if they could do a little more shopping, and the merchant agreed with a smile. When they returned to the village, Ashila rushed to hug his mother, who came out to greet him after several days of exploring the town and buying necessities. They had bought a large saw to clear the felled trees, a cart to transport crops, and the fine liquor his father had requested. However, the money Ashila had earned from his dealings with the merchants was starting to run out. Therefore, he decided that his main source of income from now on would be from selling the work animals. He priced the Valkyrie work beasts on par with other expensive working animals like draft dragons and considered them valuable assets. Ashila hoped that the Valkyries would become a special product line, like luxury vehicles, exclusively for those who could afford the high price. Ashila felt frustrated about having to do something undesirable to maintain his business. He wondered why the Fontana clan demanded that the work beast's horns be cut off upon delivery. In the past, he had cut the antlers off deer to prevent them from getting hurt while fighting, and he wanted to think carefully about whether this was okay. Ashila realized that if he treated the work beasts like livestock, a type of commodity, then cutting their horns might be necessary. With determination and a bit of guilt, Ashila cut the horns off 2 of the work beasts. After a few days, he noticed that the dehorned work beasts were still very healthy, but what was striking was that they could no longer use magic. When he focused his mana into his eyes, he saw that the work beasts still retained their magical energy, but they couldn't use it effectively. He recalled his father saying that even humans who lost both hands in battle would lose their ability to use magic. This information could be useful for Ashila. He also remembered the merchant saying he'd never heard of work beasts that could use magic, as that could cause a lot of trouble. If the Valkyries could incubate their own eggs with mana, his exclusive source of profit would be threatened. Ashila felt relieved to realize that even after cutting their horns, the work beasts retained their business value while limiting their ability to use magic, something that could keep his income stream stable and exclusive. Ashila saw that cutting the horns wasn't life-threatening to the work beasts, so he decided to dehorn all the ones he sold to the merchant. When the priest asked Ashila if he had brought back anything special, Ashila thought he was referring to the permit from the Fontana clan, but the priest explained that it wasn't just a permit to sell work beasts, but another valuable document. The priest revealed that this document officially recognized Ashila's right to develop the forest. This wasn't just about paying taxes, it also recognized his ownership rights. Over the forest north of the village, the priest explained that because the taxes were paid in cash, he wasn't restricted to using the land for agriculture, meaning he could use the land for any purpose. Ashila was confused, and the priest went on to explain that the Fontana clan had recognized him as a land-ruling family. In Fontana territory, the nobility doesn't completely control everything. Instead, ruling clans are given the right to manage a piece of land and enjoy certain privileges, on the condition that they pay taxes in cash and provide military support when needed. When Ashila asked if he was really considered a ruling clan, the priest said the Fontana clan might have intended to grant him the land as a way to tie him down, since he wasn't the firstborn son. So they probably didn't want him moving to another land to develop his work beast. They likely never imagined that a child could become so successful as to compete with other ruling clans. He realized that somehow he had attained a special status. Recalling the priest's advice, he began to think about expanding his land as much as possible, taking advantage of the rights this precious document granted him. Ashila, despite being underestimated, was determined to go further. He rode a Valkyrie through the forest, using magic to soften the soil and fell trees. The hornless horses would then drag the trees to one spot. And after leveling the barren land with magic, he realized that simply expanding his land wasn't enough to increase his income. Even though he was selling work beasts, He still needed a stable source of revenue, and the demand for special bricks seemed to be ending soon. Moreover, harvesting magic mushrooms and farming also required more manpower. Ashila decided to hire people to help with the simple tasks, like cutting branches to make logs for growing mushrooms, farming, harvesting, and storing produce in the warehouse. Since the village primarily relied on a bartering system, he had to manage his money carefully. As night fell, he thought about finding a part-time job so he could focus on his pioneering projects. Ashila started by consulting his father about who in the village could help, hoping to build a reliable team to support his work and develop the land. That evening, the meal consisted of white bread and soup made from improved wheat. Ashila and his older brother Beto were also there, and Beto showed interest in the part-time work, which disappointed Ashila because he was looking for actual employees, not to share the work with his own brother. Beto stood up and confidently declared that he would work with the younger kids and assured Ashila that everything would be fine. When he asked his mother, she said that as long as Ashila and Beto helped out during the wheat harvest, it would be all right. Ashila was conflicted and worried, knowing that if Beto actually worked seriously, he would have no complaints. But since Beto often shirked his responsibilities to go play, Ashila worried that his brother would cause trouble or be inefficient, and he even considered firing Beto if necessary. When Ashila asked Beto what he really wanted, Beto excitedly said he desperately wanted to ride the Valkyrie. Ashila understood his brother's motivation and felt he needed to manage Beto very closely if he wanted the work to go smoothly. Beto complained that it wasn't fair that only Ashila got to ride the Valkyrie. Hearing this, Ashila asked if his brother really liked the Valkyrie that much. Beto confirmed, saying that any man would be captivated by the idea. Looking at Beto from an employer's perspective, Ashila found his brother tactless for immediately criticizing his hideout, calling it a real prison. This didn't make a good impression, but Ashila decided it was a good time to experiment and improve his architectural knowledge. On his last trip to town, Ashila had paid close attention to the structure of the inn where they stayed overnight, from its exterior to the layout of the rooms. He didn't just observe. He also used his mana to meticulously examine every single brick of the building, channeling focused mana into the bricks to feel their durability and structure. Ashila carefully spread a thin, even layer of mana throughout the building and finally activated the spell in that state. Baito, watching, was astonished to see Ashila memorize the inn's entire structure perfectly, without any mistakes. He remembered that the first time Ashila tried to scan a large building all at once, he had fainted from mana depletion. He realized the cause was using his mana to fill the empty spaces inside instead of just focusing on the structure. This time, Ashila only passed his mana through the bricks and memorized the structure that made up the building, which helped him conserve mana. Relying on his memory of the shape created by his mana, Ashila was confident he could replicate the inn in a single attempt. He began by infusing mana into the earth to create bricks as building material, then recreated the shape he had memorized with mana, and finally replaced that magical structure with bricks and mortar. Looking at his creation, Ashila was amazed that he had managed to replicate the inn almost perfectly. However, since the inn in town was supported by the surrounding structures, he had to build extra sidewalls to help the building stand firm. Upon closer inspection, he realized he would probably need to create separate roofs for the extensions. Inside, Ashila's eyes lit up when he realized he had copied the architecture of a professionally designed building, offering much greater safety than anything he could have made himself. However, he still hadn't recreated the doors and furniture, which presented him with a new challenge to complete the structure. Ashila felt satisfied as he admired his new creation. Even though it still lacked doors and wooden furniture, being able to construct a sturdy building in a single attempt was proof of his progress. Ashila considered moving his base to this new building. When he went home in a cheerful mood, he asked what was for dinner. His father told him to wait a moment, and when he asked why, Ashila noticed his father seemed a bit worried. The next morning, Ashila ran into Marok, the woodcutter, and greeted him. Marok teased him, asking what Ashila was doing up so early, and he knew there were rumors that the woodcutters were unhappy about him cutting down trees in the forest on his own. Ashila wanted to avoid unnecessary trouble with them, so he decided to talk it over with Marok, who he knew might understand and sympathize with what he was doing, especially since he supplied the wood for his magic mushrooms. Ashila gave him a bottle of good wine, and Marok happily praised it, saying it was excellent. Ashila realized that saying the woodcutters were angry was probably an exaggeration, but it was clear that his tree cutting had caused some annoyance. Ashila understood that the lumberjacks were unhappy he was cutting down so many trees. He discussed with Marok the possibility of reducing the number of trees harvested, or moving deeper into the forest so as not to affect their income. Marok agreed that it was a good idea, but he stressed that the real issue wasn't just about their livelihood. Marok explained that he was replacing manual labor with magic and work beasts, making the lumberjacks feel threatened and worried about their profits. But, he added, what he was truly hurting was their pride and dignity. These lumberjacks were born into woodcutting families, raised to be lumberjacks, and have dedicated their entire lives to this work. To them, the trees aren't just a livelihood, they're a precious asset. Marok asked Ashila what he would think of someone who cut down trees carelessly, only to let them rot without being used. He explained that Ashila's actions, felling trees without using them all or letting them get damaged, only made him seem like someone who disrespected their profession and the values and pride that define their lives. Marok hoped Ashila would understand that their work is more than just a job. It's a tradition and a source of pride passed down through generations. Ashila fell silent, realizing he had unintentionally hurt the lumberjacks. Even though they understood he was clearing trees to develop the land, they were still unhappy with how he was doing it. Marok explained that they just wanted him to understand the consequences of his actions, not to oppose him outright. Ashila felt disappointed in himself, realizing he'd been so focused on development that he'd overlooked the people around him. Perhaps his father had noticed the lumberjacks' dissatisfaction and had tried to warn him before the problem got worse. Seeing Ashila lost in thought, Marok realized that even with his extraordinary abilities, the young man was still willing to listen to the opinions of others. Afterward, Ashila asked Marok if he would like to help out with his work. When he saw Marok's surprise, he explained that he wanted to start managing the forest more responsibly. Ashila knew the northern forest was vast, so vast that many who got lost in it never returned. Although he didn't know its exact size, he was aware that unsustainable development would lead to serious consequences. With a combination of magic and his Valkyries, he could reduce the forest area quickly. However, he was worried about environmental degradation. If the forest was destroyed without any control, the soil would lose its ability to retain water and nutrients, causing erosion and potentially turning the entire region into a desert. The most pressing issue was that the firewood supply could run out if they continued logging without a sustainable plan. Without enough wood for heat, the entire village wouldn't survive the harsh winter. With these thoughts in mind, Ashila resolved to manage the forest more sustainably and carefully. He hoped that together with Marok, they could develop the area without harming the natural ecosystem by planting trees with proper spacing to absorb enough sunlight, creating a stable supply of quality timber. Ashila admitted that he knew about growing vegetables and wheat, but he didn't know much about forestry. He suggested it would be very helpful to have experts like Marok and the other lumberjacks assist with this. Ashila felt excited, believing this arrangement would advance his development plans while also satisfying the lumberjacks he respected and protecting the forest. Marok expressed concern, saying that the power of nature shouldn't be controlled by humans, but he also acknowledged that Ashila clearly understood the benefits of forest management. He suggested Ashila discuss it further with the others. In the end, Marok convinced everyone that this agreement was better than letting Ashila do as he pleased. They reached an initial consensus to monitor the situation. Through these events, Ashila realized that the area north of the village would likely fall under his management. He was happy to see that a village-wide consensus on managing the forest had been established. Maddox was very impressed by the amount of wood in the cart, remarking that if Ashila had this much lumber, he could significantly expand his magic mushroom cultivation. Ashila was pleased to see that entrusting the forest management to Maddox was already yielding good results. He assigned the task of making doors, cabinets, and other wooden furniture to skilled carpenters, while Bido was in charge of the turnip and vegetable fields. Surprisingly, the number of people joining the work had increased, and Bido turned out to be excellent at managing everyone. When Ashila asked where Beto was, people said he had gone to practice riding the work beasts. Ashila was surprised to realize that these people had gathered to lighten his workload. He apologized for letting them carry the burden, but they reassured him that helping in the fields was beneficial for them too, as they received a share of the harvest. One person in the group mentioned that the children who lost their parents in the war and those who were unemployed due to the lack of jobs in the village were very grateful for this opportunity. Ashila reflected and realized that in the past, he would have probably only thought about rewarding those he hired. He felt proud seeing how well Beto was handling personnel management and organizing the labor. Thanks to this change, he could focus more on developing the project, raising animals for work, and growing magic mushrooms. But now, he understood the greater meaning of creating opportunities for everyone in the village to work together and benefit from their labor. With all these changes and developments, Ashila had turned 8 years old, but suddenly, he heard news that the field had been ravaged. Beto told him they had found wild boar tracks everywhere. Ashila wondered if a whole herd of boars had been lured by the taste of the radishes, but he remained calm, thinking it wasn't too big of a deal. Beto was furious, not understanding why he was so calm, and insisted it was a serious problem, because some villagers were refusing to work out of fear of the wild boars. Ashila recalled that in his past life, there had also been news about wild boars destroying fields. Even when traps were set, the boars were often smart enough to avoid them. So this problem really had no easy solution. He felt guilty that his expansion into the forest might have caused this problem. He also remembered Marak mentioning that wild boars would be attracted to newly cleared lands. Ashila felt a pang of guilt as he realized that expanding into the forest had affected the ecosystem. Many areas had been cleared of trees, and the disruption to the food chain had caused animals to lose their territory. He worried that if the boars got used to the sweet taste of the crops, they would continue to destroy the fields for generations to come. As the one overseeing this area, and for the sake of the people working in the fields, Ashila knew he had to act. Ashila realized he needed to find a viable solution to protect the field from the wild boars, not just for his project, but for the benefit of everyone in the village. When he arrived at the field, Ashila was stunned to see a giant wild boar roaming about, its hide so thick that even an arrow couldn't pierce it. He asked Beto in confusion what they should do, and Beto replied that Ashila was the one who needed to solve this problem. Ashila thought about asking for help from the nobility to eliminate the beast, but Maddox said the nobles would just tell them to handle it themselves. In the end, Ashila decided he would face the wild boar as planned with Valkyrie. He steeled himself, growing tense as he realized the sheer size of the beast even from a distance. Determined to protect the crops and everyone's safety, Ashila prepared to face this challenge. Ashila realized that if the giant boar charged them, they wouldn't get away with just a few scratches. It would be the end if the beast's tusks hit them. He climbed onto Valkyrie's back, feeling a sense of warmth and reassurance as she seemed to be waiting for him to calm down. Valkyrie started to run, gradually picking up speed. The wind whistling past Ashila's ears, making it difficult to aim at the target. While rushing forward at high speed, Ashila came up with a plan. He would use a scattershot rock spell to damage the boar. However, because he wasn't directly touching the ground, the spell's power was weakened as the wild boar roared. Ashila realized they needed to move quickly. The boar began to chase them, running incredibly fast and maintaining a steady distance from Valkyrie. Ashila broke into a smile and shouted, announcing that everything was going according to plan. He noticed Valkyrie was moving with a complete understanding of his intentions and felt that she was truly a reliable partner. Suddenly, Valkyrie leaped high into the air, reaching the altitude of birds in flight. Ashila asked in amazement if they were flying. Just then, Valkyrie landed on the ground with tremendous force, making Ashila keenly aware of her extraordinary power. He realized that Valkyrie possessed incredible physical abilities, which gave them a better chance in the challenging battle ahead. Ashila wondered if magically enhancing their physical attributes could take him and Valkyrie to a whole new level. As he got off Valkyrie's back, he saw a large pit in the middle of the forest, the trap he had set for the giant wild boar. The wild boar had fallen into the pit and was bleeding.